When I was a kid, I moved around a lot. My dad first left my mom when I was 5, but he came back every now and then until my mom finally had enough recorded evidence for the police to take her abuse claims seriously. Even after he wasn't allowed anywhere near, that house where I spent my first years had too many bad memories. My mom took me away, far away, so that we could start again, have a better life somewhere new. But jobs were hard to come by, and the cities didn't have time for someone trying to rebuild their happiness. She always worked a couple of part-time jobs at once, and I know it killed her to have to be away from me all the time. When I started asking why she always ate so much less than me, she told me she was on a diet. I didn't know what that meant, so she told me it was an eating program that would make her happy. I was young, and I stopped worrying about it after that. Whenever a better situation would come up, less working hours, higher pay, or a kinder heart, we'd drive for a day or two down to a new place. My mom made a game out of it, turned it all into a grand adventure. Of course, I know the reality of the situation now, but my happiest memories are still on the road, singing rock songs with my mom and being able to choose my own snacks from the gas stations we'd pass. So as a result, I changed schools a lot as I grew up. It didn't bother me too much, because it felt like a natural part of life to me. I was never around long enough to form friendships that were hard to let go. I was just eternally in transit. I came to class, I talked to other kids, but like a ghost, I was never really there. In grade 3, my mother had a friend of her sister who offered to help cover some grocery costs and get my mom a decent job. So we moved nearby and I started at a new school, Carnan Primary. My teacher there was Miss Varia. She always wore white gloves and a long dress. Her hair was tied up behind her head so that the outline of her forehead was obnoxious and jarring, and when she smiled, her lips pressed together so tightly it looked as if she were holding back slugs that were inside of her mouth. I said exactly that once to another kid, but we'll get to that later. Miss Varia's words were usually nice, but the way they came out of her like a hiss of steam, and the stiff way she would walk from desk to desk peering over your shoulder, meant that no one liked her anyway. All the teachers were like that, to be honest, and they all wore gloves. They'd watch us during playtime, standing at the corners of the oval and staring at the children in the playground. It was a pretty nice looking school, to be honest, and there were trees all around the edge of the property, both inside and outside the school fence. They were great for playing hide and seek, but sometimes you duck behind a tree and one of the teachers would just be standing there, staring. Miri told me that if you got too close to one of the teachers, their heads would spin, bang, and look at you instead. So whenever I saw a teacher, I'd just run to another tree a little bit away and hide there instead. Miri was the popular girl. I don't know why she was, though, because she was mean to a lot of kids. She scared people by telling stories, like the one about the old lady janitor whose closet was full of people without faces. But she was especially mean to this one girl whose name I forget, and me, of course, because we weren't as well off as her. Sometimes she'd sniff at our clothing, make jokes about living in trailers, or poke fun at the color of the other girl's eyes. Apparently they were bright green, so Miri would always call her snake or alligator. I suppose we'll call her Allie now. Allie would try to tell the teachers about Miri teasing her, but the teachers would always shrug her off, even when she was crying. Eventually Allie slapped Miri, and of course, as it always goes, Allie was the one who got in trouble. That's when I first learned about the happy room. If you got into serious trouble, the teachers would tell you that you've made them very unhappy, and then they would take you to the happy room so that you could learn how to make them feel better again. At first I thought it was just like detention, but when Allie came back to class after going to the happy room, her eyes were wide and her eyelids were shaking as if all she wanted to do was shut them, but she couldn't. I tried to ask her about what happened there, but she would never say a word about it. Allie hated Miri more and more after that, but Miri kept pushing it further and further, and occasionally Allie would snap. Every time this happened, she'd be dragged screaming to the happy room. A couple of other kids started getting in trouble a lot too, and they were pretty much the same. They'd go in screaming, they'd come out silent, shivering and staring. One of the kids got sent to the happy room for something really weird. As a dare, when Miss Varia walked past his desk, he snatched her glove off. She gave out such a gasp that he burst out laughing, until she took the glove back and twisted two of his fingers. I can remember this much: his right hand, his pointer finger, and his middle finger. had been twisted 360 degrees around each other like a corkscrew. Some of the bones in those fingers had snapped and pierced his skin, poking out at strange angles. In the parts of his fingers where those bones should have been, red, glistening, and floppy. He screamed and screamed and screamed. And Miss Varia picked him up, practically shouting to the class, "I can see I've made you very unhappy, Timmy, so why don't I take you to the happy room so that you can feel better?" She stormed off, carrying the boy in her arms. A few minutes later, they both came back into the room quietly. The boy's hand was totally fixed. There was no evidence of an injury at all. No blood, no wound, no scar, nothing. And like all the others, his eyelids were stuck open, twitching. Miss Varia looked at us all and said slowly and deliberately, "Nothing has happened here. And if you even think about telling anyone about it, nothing might happen to you, too." In the end, people just pretended it never happened, but a lot of people stopped coming to the school. I can't remember exactly how many or specifically who, but the class started feeling strangely small. That's all. One day, Miri was making fun of how people looked. I don't know why I still wanted to impress her, but I did. So I said the best insult I'd ever thought of, that Miss Varia looked like she was always trying to hold slugs in her mouth. Miri stopped at once and told me I shouldn't have said that. I got angry at her, and I told her she only didn't like my insult because it came from me, and she didn't like me because I wasn't filthy rich and spoiled like her and her family. Miri was furious and told me that I needed to shut my mouth, that my family wouldn't even be afloat if not for hers. Turns out that gracious benefactor to my mom was Miri's dad. I told Miri I'd rather starve than have to hang out with people like her. She stormed off, and I realized what was going to happen. Sure enough, she came back with Miss Varia, who held my hand in her white, cold glove, and said, "You've made me very unhappy. Come with me to the happy room." I didn't want to, but I couldn't say no either. She led me back into the school building through corridors, past our classroom. I said, "Can I please grab a piece of paper to make notes?" She laughed and said I wouldn't need any, but I said, "Please, I want to learn properly." She tutted impatiently and led me into the room. I put a pen into my pocket and the notebook into my armpit. She resumed walking, taking me past the legendary janitor's closet into a basic wooden door with a little sign saying Happy Room on it. An old peeling sticker of a smiley face was molding on the corner of the sign. Miss Varia pushed me through the door and sat me down. "Let me show you something special. I want you to watch very closely." She smiled, her gross, ugly smile, with her lips pressed together. And then something slipped out of the corners of her lips. It was almost... no, not quite, like a slug, but it was a deep, dark red that stained the desk it dropped on as it wriggled around. Miss Varia laughed, and as her mouth opened, a flood of leeches poured down her face like one giant writhing creature growing rapidly, sending out short, fat tentacles to cover the desk. I tried to look away, I tried to close my eyes, but for some reason I just couldn't. I had to see it all, coming closer and closer towards me. She took off her gloves and I could see her palms for the first time. They had all these little black holes in them, and deep inside I could make out something moving, twisting. Her body was full of leeches. She unbuttoned her shirt and her breast spilled out, also dotted with all these holes that seemed to breathe, seemed to shudder and giggle like mouths covering her body. She stood naked in front of me, bending and stretching her honeycomb skin as underneath it all, something coiled and uncoiled, dark red oozing, crawling. I couldn't look away. But in my moment of panic, my arms flung themselves around the notebook, dropping to the floor, immediately overwhelmed by a wave of leeches on the floor. Every surface of the room was covered in them, and they were coming up the legs of my seat. It was like being in a stomach. Like I would be digested by all the moving, spitting, staining red, like I would be covered in sticky, crawling slime. Feel all their teeth on my skin. And Miss Varia was reaching forwards for me with her breathing holes in her hands, and if I screamed as I was covered in the leeches, they would come into my mouth and slither down my tongue, fill my throat, slip inside of me, and eat me inside out. And then my hand felt it, the pen. I grabbed onto it and slammed it into Miss Varia's reaching hand, and I heard a howl I can't describe. The spell was broken and I could close my eyes, but I didn't want to. I had to get out. She pulled the pen out, stained, lurched forward, and stabbed my arm with the pen. I yelled with pain as the hot leech blood mixed with my own inside the womb, gasping for breath as I pulled the pen out and pierced the pulsing mass between her skin, again and again and again and again. The leeches were retreating off the floor, off the walls, off the door, and as soon as I could see a path out, I leaped off the chair and out the door. I was in a panic and I was disoriented. Which way had I come down this corridor? I ran in a random direction, and I passed doorway after doorway, each labeled Happy Room and with a fading sticker. This wasn't the right way. I needed to go in the other direction, but I couldn't stop myself from looking through one of the windows. It was Allie in a Happy Room, and this time it was the janitor who was unfurling, and the window in the door was blocked out by the squirming dark pustule pressed against the glass. I ran back down the corridor in the other direction, but sooner than I thought it would, the door of that room opened, and the old lady janitor was steering Allie down the corridor towards me. Allie's facial features were dripping off her like ink, her green eyes drooping and running down her face, off her chin and onto the floor. And then I didn't know who it was. I barely knew who she was by then, but in that moment I lost any recognition, any memory of who Allie was. She became nobody. She no longer existed, in the past or in the present or in the forever future. The janitor saw me and roared that horrible, impossible sound. I opened the nearest door to run into, but it was the closet, and it was just like all the stories, all the faceless bodies inside that still held themselves in pain, suffering eternally but forgotten completely. I turned, and I don't know how I managed it, running as fast as I could, anywhere I could, but I made it out of the building. Bleeding, stained red with leeches, and all the other children screaming when they saw me running out. I wanted to get out of the school, but the teachers saw me too, and they were all around the fence, coming out from behind the trees, snarling at me. There was no way past. I wanted to fall onto the floor and cry, but my mom, if I didn't get back home, what would she... I had to make it back for her. And with every bit of energy that my aching, burning body could possibly give, I lunged at one of the teachers, knocking them down. The gates were locked and the fences were high, but I was a kid. I was poor, I was weak, but I'll be damned if I didn't know how to climb a tree. It was like fire up my forearm as the stab wound stretched with each pull of a branch, a murmuring hole on my own body, laughing at my attempt to escape. But I made it to the top of the tree, and I rolled off a branch hanging over the fence, falling through layers of leaves onto the grass outside the school grounds. I ran all the way back home. The teachers didn't follow. I don't think they could leave the school at all. You know, I only remembered this a few weeks ago. My mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer earlier this year. It had already spread to her pelvis by that point, so it wasn't really a matter of treatment anymore. It was just a matter of time. In those last moments, sometimes she'd stare into the distance as if she was missing something she couldn't explain. I was going through the attic for anything she might like to see again. Before, well, we didn't have pictures from my childhood, but we had little things that meant something to us. A mug she used every day, a blanket, and then I found the birth certificates, one for me and one for Bethany. We were born on the same day. We were twins. Initially, I thought it couldn't be real. But then snippets started coming back of my time at Carnan Primary, and eventually I pieced it together to what you read above. It turns out the school burned down a few years back. Some crazed parent lit the whole place up. Nothing left but ashes. But I know that even if there were any bodies left, they wouldn't have been identifiable, or they wouldn't have been human at all. Whatever was living there in the school, in the teachers, I don't think it fed off people's bodies. I think it fed off their existences. Off people's memories and experiences with them. And once they consumed it all, it's as if they never existed, and they just fade out without you ever realizing. There might be traces of them left around here and there, but the human mind does a great job of filling in unexplainable holes. When I visited my mom for what would be one of the last times, she asked if she could see my scar. I rolled up my sleeve, and she kissed it. She cried and told me she was so sorry that she wasn't good enough. Sorry that she didn't stop him when he hurt me. I held her in my hands and I told her that she was more than good enough, that she was the best mother that I could ever wish for. And I wanted to go on to tell her that she never let my father touch me, that she never let him come near me when he was in a rage, even if that meant she would get hurt instead. That she worked tirelessly to support not only herself, not just me, but 2 children. That she loved us both, but I didn't know what would happen if I reminded her of everything. Of the way she would hold Bethany's cheeks, look into her eyes, and call her a precious emerald. So I just told her that the past was far behind us, and that whatever terrible things had happened in our lives, we had survived, and we had come so far, and that was what mattered in the end. She passed away last Thursday, peacefully in her sleep. I was there until the end, and I know I'll remember her forever. That's it. That's the end of the show. Welcome to the 100% scripted and pre-recorded portion of tonight's entertainment. If you liked what you heard, I'd be happier than a cat on a table full of antique glassware. Because you know cats love knocking things off tables. Well, if you liked it, comment on the video, like the video, dislike it if you disliked it. Let me know what you thought. I see every like, comment, and subscription. I'm always watching. You'll also find my Ethereum address, just in case you want to support me and my cryptocurrency gambling addiction. Just kidding though. Anyways, this now concludes the 100% scripted and pre-recorded portion of tonight's entertainment. Thank you for listening and have a great day.